Okay, hi everyone. I'm the owner of Neckar's Farm. We're in Branford, Connecticut. We decided to go with Neckers. A lot of us down in Indian Neck usually call ourselves Neckers, so it was pretty much a no-brainer. And I deal with a lot of rescues. We have about 100 colonies of honeybees in Branford, Connecticut, and we also rescue these little girls. These would be the common eastern bumblebee. And what we try to promote is call us before you spray. A lot of these girls are better off in our farm or in one of the located areas nearby. And it's not much to rescue these girls from our standpoint, so it's pretty easy. Here I am with a swarm in early spring last year, and you can see how large these things can get. I had to use gloves more for the tree that I had to climb up than for actual protection from the bees. They're actually really docile when you're up close to them, especially when they're in swarm mode. A little bit about me. I started gardening probably before I could walk. My grandfather raised me for the most part, and one of my fondest memories was racing bean poles around branches as a toddler. And he'd always have the big thick branch, and I'd have the thin branch, and he'd always let me win by having it go up. But my grandfather taught me pretty much how to beekeep and feed my family. He dealt with hunger, I guess, three times in his life. Once in World War II, over in Italy, and he always taught me by these words: if you're not hungry, it's not so bad. And I've pretty much taken that into account, and I've tried to do my best to just be around plants, wildlife, and grow as much as I can. And this has bloomed into a great career with honeybees. Um, at around 5, 6 years old, when we were hunting for arrowheads in the woods of Woodbridge, he used to have me collect the queen bumblebees in the spring, and we used to take these bumblebees and we'd put them in a shoebox and create great pollination for our gardens. And we had huge tomato gardens, huge tomato gardens, and it's just something that became a real passion for me. Anything to do with being around food, plants, and growth just became a real passion for me. Um, so a lot of people are always asking, what are bees? What are honeybees? And one of the biggest problems I encounter in my practice is misidentification. So I want to go through a quick thing with identifying, what honeybees are, what do they do, and why they're so important. Because there's so many different things that have been in the media, and a lot of it's wrong. The Save the Bee motion is a great movement, but it hasn't been as impactful as it should be, and it's not really geared to the right direction. So when we talk about honeybees, they're herbivore winged insects that live in very large colonies, up to 80,000. Um, they basically get all of their energy from flowers. They get their protein from the pollen that's in those flowers. They get their carbohydrates from the nectar, and there's a little bit of amino acids that are also mixed in with that pollen. That's why when you ever push pollen between your fingers, you feel that oily grease that comes out of it. It's mostly protein, but there's some amino acids in there. And then they also get their propolis from tree sap, and that's actually what glues their whole colony together. That is their antiviral seal that they put around the inside of a tree to protect against bacteria, protect against viruses, um, which I think a lot of people have found out recent history that the tinctures that we make from propolis can be really healthy for us and really be bacterial and antiviral. I know there's a couple practices in town that actually are prescribing buckfast honey for the common flu. So there's a lot of good stuff that is in honey that really is good for us. And here it is. Here's them in their whole glory. This is me in just County, New York, And you see that top band right there, that's all honey. And you see a band right here, that is nectar that they're still drying out, and they haven't quite created it to become honey. And the difference between the band that's closed and the band that's open right there is the bottom that is not sealed yet can ferment. It can take on moisture, and once that moisture goes on upon 18%, the honey will start to ferment, and that will give us one of our favorite old time drinks, mead, which is literally the first alcoholic beverage that humans made. And little do we know, the honeymoon actually comes from bees. What would happen was a lot of early couples would be locked in their house and for a full moon, and they were given as much meat as they can drink, and obviously they would do what they do after married couples get married, and that's where the honeymoon actually came from. So honeybees have a lot to do with humanity, and a lot to do with our progression when it comes to culturing plants and culturing a lot of our farmland. We've had a very close tie to them. The Egyptians had a very strong tie to the honeybees as well. Um, and here we've got one of the common mistakes, misrepresentations. So everybody, I'll get many calls, even from other beekeepers. Oh yeah, there's a basketball in a tree and whatnot. And right here we have what I like to call a bald-faced hornet. And it comes by many names. And these are actually take down alive. One thing I'm a big practitioner is no chemicals. I try to use zero chemicals no matter what I'm doing. And I will actually take these to the swamps in Guilford and some of the marshlands in Branford, and I will put them out of the way of other people, and I will actually reestablish these nests. And I'm sure some of you questioning why in God's name would I ever do that and risk getting stung a ton of times, which I do. But they're actually natural defenses to mosquitoes. When you're putting them in a marsh or a swamp, and you're actually saving these colonies of hornets, they actually keep that mosquito population in check. And it's one of the other things I attribute to my grandfather taught me when I was very young, is keeping the yellow jackets around would actually keep the mosquitoes away. It's a natural way to work. And I actually had a bald-faced hornet nest in the middle of my apiary all last year. They didn't bother me a single time, and they actually didn't attack my bees. They were kind of peaceful and happy. These get more aggressive when they start running out of food. Um, the yellow jackets, for instance, that everybody can't stand, they're usually provoked. You step on their nest, you bump in their house, and they're naturally aggressive. Unlike honeybees, they're omnivores. So yellow jackets, for instance, can also be beneficial for a lot of us that are gardeners, because they'll clear the aphids right off a plant if they're close enough to your infected plants, and they will actually feast on all those negative insects that usually plague us. Not so much, like the lily leaf beetles and the harder shelled insects, but a lot of the aphids, they will strip right off a plant better than most ladybugs. So they do have a lot of benefits. We get a lot of bad, we give them a lot of bad PR because in the fall they become extremely sugar hungry. And what I mean by that, in a yellow jacket colony, only the queen overwinters. The queen comes out around May, and that queen starts a nest. And the pupa that she creates, the eggs lay, and then that turns into larva, and that's pupa. The pupa will actually give off a sugary substance after it's fed another insect larva or whatnot. And that sugary substance actually feeds the next generation of worker hornets. Those worker hornets would be kind of addicted to that sugar. They eat that sugar, and that's what gives them a lot of their energy. Well, right around August, they cut off the pupa production, and they stop making worker yellow jackets. They only make queen yellow jackets in the colony. When they go through that sugar starvation, that's when they become very aggressive. That's when you're going to find them on your soda drinks. You're going to find them on any spilled sugar. So, right around August, that's when I would say be very careful, very mindful of any sugary or sweet substances that you leave out. We actually had a member of our community that had to go to the hospital last year because a bald-faced hornet had just that. She had a sweet drink that was out by the beach. They ended up finding a bald-faced hornet nest right next to her house. I came to the aftermath, but I kind of put two and two together. They are very attracted to sugar right around that time, right before fall. So we can work with better practices on not putting it around them. We all know the bumblebee. We love them. They're flying pandas. They're cute. They're adorable. They can get aggressive if you get too close to their nest. A lot of times they will build their nest right next to your house, right underneath a tire, whatnot. I'm the guy to call for that. I will come for free. I will remove that nest. I will put them in a safe habitat. If you want to have your own bumblebee, have a wax covered shoe case, whole bunch of leaves in there and a couple of sugar cubes with 5/16 to 3/8 hole in it, and that could provide them a great home. I used to catch queen bumblebees every spring, and they had a 50% take on that. If I put a queen bee in that box, there was a 50% chance that she was going to stay there, make her colony. I would put her underneath a safe area, whether it be a deck or not, or something else, and they would stay there. And my garden would be, very well pollinated. A bumblebee, for instance, has a 93% pollination rate, which that means if she goes to a flower, she has a 93% chance that she's going to pollinate that flower. With the honeybees, they only have a 7% chance. The difference between the honeybee and the bumblebee is we can keep 60,000 honeybees in a movable hive, and we're able to bring those to our gardens and have mass pollination. So if I have 100 honeybees that visit a flower, it's going to far surpass the pollination rate of one or two bumblebees. And the most part of these, that a lot of everybody gets freaked out by a lot of the girls on this picture, and I will mention girls quite often because the majority of the insects that you see flying around are female. In a honeybee colony, for instance, about 95% of that colony is female during the summer. In the winter, it's almost 100%. And the girls do just about all the work. The drones in the honeybee colony do absolutely nothing. They're just there to procreate. All right, so right here we have a picture of all these samples were collected dead. But these are all more of the aggressive culprits that we're used to in our area. From left to right, you have the eastern yellow jacket, which, they can get very nasty very, very easily. And once you aggravate them, you want to stay away from their homes. The bald-faced hornet, which will often create the global nest that's outside on trees. Again, they're a little less aggressive than the eastern yellow jacket, but again, they can be very aggressive if you poke at them or if you bang into them. And then lastly, you have the European hornet. These girls are really big. They pack a wallop of a sting. I've gotten hit by them many times, and you really don't want to get anywhere near their nest. And believe it or not, all the press about the Asian hornet, these are about an inch shorter than an Asian hornet. So that kind of gives you a size idea of how big these are. And the honeybee is a little bit smaller than those yellow jackets right there. So if we ever have to deal with the Asian hornet, they are massive. And if anybody can watch my clicker right here, and everybody's asking what's what, there's your queen bee right there. So this gives you an up close personal perspective of what the queen is. And in this entire picture, all these busy bees, there is not a single male. You also get a quick shot of a bee in a larva stage right here where my mouse is. and you really can't see it, but there's an egg right there, and they kind of look like little grains of rice. But you can see how much bigger she is than the other bees. She's about 50% bigger in the thorax. Now, there are 7 species, common species of honeybees in the world. We currently only have one type that can live where we are. It's Apis mellifera. Um, that bee is pretty much responsible for all the pollination in the northern and the far southern climates. Um, Honeybees are subtropical, but they have learned to adapt the ability to live in trees. And that ability has um, made it so they can actually overwinter with long periods. The honey that we as beekeepers grab from them, that's actually stores that's supposed to get them through winter. And we have to be very careful on how much we take. Quite often, I am feeding a lot of my rescues far more than I will ever get back from them. But one of the reasons why we are always worried about these honeybees is they actually provide food for 1 out of every 3 bites that we eat. Humans are very big into monoculture. We want to grow everything in one area. The almond trees are all in one area. The olives are all in one area. Tomatoes, big fields of tomatoes. And we're going to touch on this a little bit later, but that creates huge deserts of land, and those flowers are only blooming for a few weeks and then nothing. And the only way we can actually properly pollinate those huge deserts is by moving these honeybees around. It's estimated that we've actually had benefits from honeybees up to 25,000 years ago, which really boggles your mind when you think about how far back that is. So here we go. Here is a picture of a fallen tree. I got called about this in Wingdale, New York. And this one I was actually there for quite a while before I actually got called to it. And this is actually their natural habitat. This actually gives you a diagram of how they are supposed to live in the wild. You can see this propolis covering this entire inside of the trunk, and then they build their wax comb from there. And then they just fill it in with their honeycomb slowly. Now, all of their honeycomb is built from wax. They actually produce their own wax through their abdomen, and they for every pound of wax that they produce, it takes about 7 pounds of honey. So it's quite a bit of work to just get to that phase. And here's another one that I had to do a rescue. I believe this one was in Newtown last year when we had all the wind damage. I had 3 trees that came down in a span of a day. It was a day and a half that I had to go out there, cut these trees open, and try to save the colonies. Believe it or not, these girls are extremely peaceful when they're in this state. And to prove that, there's me with one of my daughters. And I mean, I'm so confident that they're peaceful that I'm able to bring her that close to them. And she doesn't even have shoes on. So when everybody panics that there's bees around you, they're really peaceful girls. But when they're not given these trees to go into, there's gonna be all kinds of chaos. And so here's a swarm that landed on a house. This is their way of procreating. Right around May, you're gonna see a lot of news of bees and trees or bees and on the side of a house. And this is their way of procreating. Their seasons are a little bit ahead of ours. So right now they're in spring. You know, they're just starting their spring right now. They're starting to procreate their brood, and they're starting to get ready for the nectar flow. Their colonies need to be at full strength right before that nectar flow hits. And in order to do that, they're always a couple weeks, if not more, ahead of where we are for weather. So this is a nice swarm that hit a house, I believe, in Middletown. Here's another one at night in Plainsville. And the big, huge colonies of bees. So this is about 30,000 bees right here. Um, and we want to catch them. We, as in beekeepers, want to catch them when they're in this state. It's very easy right now for me to go up to this tree, shake them in a box, find the queen, and save that colony. I could also treat for a lot of the diseases really easily when they're in this state. And this is a very small swarm of maybe 3,000. I believe this one was in New York. This is how small they are. So if you guys ever see something like this, first off, it's very magical. It's a wondrous thing to be next to, but it's extremely peaceful. So don't be that person that goes right up to it and sprays them down, because they're not going to sting you. They're going to leave you alone. You leave them alone. They're so peaceful in this state. It's very tranquil. It's not until they have established a home that they're even slightly aggressive. This is what you want to avoid. So if that swarm isn't caught by us, when they're out and about, there's a good chance they're going to find a cavity, and that cavity could be in your house. This particular colony was 12 feet up a house in Groton, Connecticut. And this gives you kind of an idea of how big of a size that they can actually build. Once they fill in these cavities, they're going to keep going and going. And another problem, if somebody sprays for these, all those honey stores that are in that house are now going to sit. They're going to attract mice. They're going to attract ants. They're going to attract roaches. A lot of times, the fee that I will give to remove these from a house is almost a tenth of what it'll cost for them to repair the walls once that honey starts to ferment, leak on the walls, and then they have an infestation of several different species of insects and possibly mice. Um, Here's one, I believe this was near the Catskills. This one alone, it took 16 hours to remove this. And I went 16 hours straight without even eating. You could see that it had hardwood shingles and plaster. This colony was close to, I think it was 12 square feet. Massive, massive. And this is going a foot into the rafters. And this one was probably about 80,000 bees in this. Everybody remembers that really dry summer that we had last year. One of the key components was we didn't have rain so long that honeybees were actually able to build this in an open chimney in Hamden. So this was in Hamden, and you can see all the growth that they have down here. This went down almost 6 feet, straight down into their chimney, and this is all of what they were able to produce in as little as 6 months. It's kind of mind-numbing when you think about how creative and how great they are with their architecture. Um, but those are all things we want to avoid, and we want to put them in hives. This is a beautiful booming colony that's in our backyards. This is right out of Branford. But this is where we want to keep them. They're safe. They're happy. I can monitor them, and they're not susceptible as easily to disease. So, um, one way we can identify to, be more in touch with the bees is to identify what's going to attract them, is to know what they are about. Um, they have one of the best eyesights in the animal kingdom, and little do we know, they have 5 eyes. They have two trichromatic eyes that deal with a little bit different spectrum than we do. Instead of seeing red, yellow, and blue like we do, they see blue, yellow, and ultraviolet. So when we have red on, it's kind of like seeing gray. They're not able to actually see the color red. Um, but their eyes are built, even though they look like they're very compound, almost exactly like ours with their ocula. They also have three simple eyes. They're positioned right at the top of their head, and they're used for navigation when they're flying. And it really helps them when they're going at about 23 miles per hour. They're able to adjust everything to move out of the way or move in certain directions at a flick of a second. Which brings me up to the other thing. Their flicker effect is almost 5 times faster than humans. So if you've ever tried to swat at a bee, you're actually wasting a lot of energy, because now you have something that can travel at 23 miles per hour that has a flicker effect 5 times faster than yours, and basically can process everything that you're doing before you can do it. And now you're also creating an aggressive bee. So I tell anybody that's new around honeybees or bumblebees, whatever I'm bringing them around, to simply just stay calm. Try not to have a lot of scent on you. They will get attracted, they will get aggressive to certain scents that are unnatural, but really just stay calm. And that bee is landing on you, you're just a resting post. It's just that's getting you a little bit closer to nature, and it's not trying to attack you if it's resting on you. It's just saying hi. And it's very hard. I mean, I have people that, have been doing this for years and they still get a little freaked out. But it's something that eventually you guys can get used to if you practice. Um, so one thing about the ultraviolet that they see whenever you're looking at flowers, you ever know the variegated lines that go up and down the flowers and the petals? Those actually act as landing spots for the honeybees. This is like a beacon. If you ever watch the movie Avatar, where everything's glowing, that's kind of how the bees see flowers. Those are glowing landing spots. At 23 miles an hour, they need to be able to pick a flower out in a pasture, maybe up to a quarter mile away. So in order to do that, that glowing nature of the flower actually helps them. Um, so we'll get to all of this, traveling all the way around can, make these girls very thirsty. One thing that I like to say that while they're out and about, this is an acceptable method of helping bees. Putting marbles out with water in it, just water, not sugar water, is a great way to help the girls. It is not going to allow them drown, and it's really safe for them. Putting out standing water is always going to be a negative. To retouch on their sense of eyesight, think about that when you're planting a garden for bees. Um, sedum works great, but red sedum isn't always the best choice. Roses, they smell amazing, but they are not going to be attracted to, or they're not going to have bees attracted to them because they can't see them. So when you're thinking of the red spectrum, those are flowers you kind of want to stay away from when you're trying to pull bees into your garden. Um, okay, so let's talk about their smell. Um, they have one of the most incredible smells, senses of smell in the animal kingdom. I believe it's 2 times stronger than a fruit fly and 3 times stronger than a mosquito. Um, they are able to smell through their antenna and actually through their feet. And they are able to actually sniff out bombs. They have a training clinic in California, which is remarkable, where they put bees in a chamber, and by feeding little drops of sugar, they're able to train a bee how to detect a bomb in as little as 7 minutes. There's also a process in France where they're using a two-celled chamber that they can actually capture the very first sense of cancer cells in the human body in as little as 10 minutes, which could be an amazing, amazing step in cancer research. And the one thing that it helps is, instead of a dog that takes many months to train for bomb sniffing, it only takes a few minutes to train the bee. Um, and same thing with the cancer detection. But that kind of tells you how strong of a sense of smell they have. So they are going to go after the sweeter nectar. So if you have, beautiful, beautiful flowers, but they're not producing very strong nectar, it's not doing much to bring the bees to your yard. Or your neighbor has better, stronger nectar than you do, and they're just going to ignore your flowers first. One of the things that always drives people nuts that's setting up a new yard is I'll have clients that have honeybees on their property and I'm taking care of them, and they're always complaining, well, why aren't they in my garden? And I'll have to explain to them, well, they're at your neighbor's clover, they're at your neighbor's black lotus tree. Um, Unless you thoroughly saturate an area with pollinators, they're going to skip a lot of your veggies and fruit. Honeybees are going to tend to gravitate towards the fruit. With the exception of pumpkins and squash, they're going to probably avoid most of your vegetables. So don't expect to see a ton of bees on your vegetables. One thing we counteract that is, put a bed of flowers in between your vegetables, such as mint. Mint is amazing at bringing bees in. Lavender. Lavender is an excellent, excellent flower to bring bees in. And both of those have tiny, tiny pink flowers. Everybody would think that they're going to go after the liliums or the peonies. Um, Unless you have a big blooming peony tree, which I have a few, they're often going to avoid them. Um, they're often going to avoid the double petaled flowers, as you may. So we look right here. Here's their antenna, and then they have their feet, and this is actually where they use to smell. And then you have the propolis. This is their tongue. So when you think of flowers, any of those flowers like foxgloves, where it has those long ungulated flowers, um, they're not technically good for honeybees. They're more suited for a bumblebee because a bumblebee actually has a longer tongue than a honeybee. So when we're trying to save the bees, I always try to say, well, which type? Because mason bees are very small and they're able to get into places where honeybees aren't. So just because you don't see a honeybee on that flower doesn't mean it's not being extremely beneficial. Um, Foxglove is extremely good for bumblebees, but it's not going to do anything for your honeybees. Um, this is a basic guideline of a lot of the flowers that are out there that are really good for bees. But as I'm going down this list, I only see a few that I would actually recommend. I really love aster, clover. As far as trees, basswood, black lotus, maples are excellent sources of nectar. Trees are going to give your the bees in the area more nectar, more pollen, and more benefits than any of the flowers that you're going to plant, minus maybe if you have a whole field of buckwheat. Um, but with the aster, I have a species that I've cultivated in my backyard that we're going to see a picture of that can grow 8 feet tall, and it's pollinating at the perfect time for the butterfly migration when they're coming south. So I have always kept about a quarter acre of that going at all times. And whenever you see the legs of a bee and you see all those beautiful colors on the back of it, here's a diagram of just an idea of all the different colors that you could see on a bee's leg. These are all colors of the pollen from those flowers. And it's really amazing when you start looking at this. As beekeepers, we actually try to learn a lot of this because we want to figure out what they're targeting. What are those bees going after at that particular time? And this is one of the methods that we use. And we basically study what's in bloom during that season. And we'll look, okay, they have red on them and it's starting to get, almost fall. All right, they might have dead nettle. They might be working the dead nettle. And this is a really great tool to use for us beekeepers to kind of figure out what's going where and what they're bringing in. Um, as mentioned before, honeybees are pollinators and they can be transported in large numbers. This is why we use them. If we could use bumblebees in large numbers, we would, but a large bumblebee colony is only 300. That's a peak colony. That's probably I don't even know if I've ever even touched the number of 300 bumblebees in a nest. I think my biggest bumblebee nest has probably been 150 that I've had. Um, they also don't overwinter the same way that honeybees do. Honeybees can overwinter. They're out there all year. They cut down their numbers. Every single one of my colonies is alive right now with 15,000 bees. By spring, I try to work them up to 40 to 50,000 bees. But we are not able to do that with bumblebees. The queens go out, they overwinter in a pile of leaves, and that's where they stay until spring wakes them up. This is another important point. If you have a pile of leaves under your blackberries, your blueberries, It's fine to mow down your blackberries and your raspberries in early fall, but once that's mowed over, try to leave those leaves if you can till maybe after May. You know, after May, when all those beneficial insects have woken up, that's when you really want to go at it and remove those leaves, because that way you're giving them a real chance to hibernate, come out, produce the next generation, and by the end of May, they're already moved on. And those leaves that are biodegrading over your blackberry bushes, I don't know about you guys, but I love the taste when you got, a nice mulch on top of your blackberries and your raspberries. It definitely increases the flavor. Um, One thing that many people don't understand about honeybees until you actually tell them is that when they hit a flower, if they're hitting clover, they will only hit clover. So when they program themselves, a bee will come back to that colony. They found a huge vast quantity of clover flowers in a field, and that bee will then produce a waggle dance. That waggle dance will actually tell the other honeybees exactly how far away it is, what direction it is, and about how much food stores they need to take to get there. And the bees that watch that waggle dance will reproduce that same dance, and it'll spread throughout the colony. Those bees will then take exactly the amount of resources that they need to fly to that area. If anything knocks them off their path, for instance, if you see a bee on the ground, sometimes all you need to do is give it a little bit of sugar water, and then it'll have enough energy for its wings to work. But those bees leave that colony with exactly how much energy that they need to get to those flowers, pull that nectar out of that flower, and then fly back. This gives them more room to bring more nectar back. But it is almost like a gauntlet. Um, this is also important when we talk about bringing large colonies to these fields or whatnot to pollinate crops. The more visits you get, the more proper pollination you get. Each flower, if you have 20 visits on a flower, it's going to produce a fruit that tastes better than, say, you only had 5 visits to that flower. We've all seen those blackberries where it's half developed, or the raspberry where it's not quite as big and it's not quite as tasty. That has a lot of direct reflection on how well it was pollinated. We can water our plants properly. We can fertilize them properly. What really is difficult is actually pollinating ourselves. And with the bees, keeping these bees around is one of those missing elements that we really need as gardeners. And right here, I have one of my favorites, which is the Martagon lily. Um, but unfortunately, it provides very little food to the bees. So, this is the back of our farm. Right here, you have a peach tree in bloom in May. And, with the proper pollination, this is what your trees are going to look like. Just covered in fruit. And you're able to basically, eat right out of your backyard. It's not very hard to get that. And, these are all raspberries, grapes, I believe there's blueberries and blackberries, all from the back of our yard with proper pollination. And the fruit tastes so much better if you have proper pollination. Um, so, I talk to a lot of people all across the spectrums of gardening clubs. It's one of the more enjoyable things I have in my career. So you get all different types of collectors and different types of hobbyists when it comes to the garden world. Um, and you always get those gardeners that love exotics. They love to be the first to have this and the first to have that, and they're they're always bragging about what they have and what they want. A lot of those plants, they could be beautiful, but they're not necessarily going to provide anything for our native pollinators or our non-native pollinators, because our pollinators haven't been around those plants. Um, Reversely, once in a while we get a gem in the rough. And, one of those plants is Japanese knotweed. Now, I'm sure half of the people on here hate that plant more than anything, but it is a late bloomer that provides a lot of nectar, that provides also a lot of pollen that helps get these colonies through the winter. So although I will never cultivate Japanese knotweed, I know that the honey from it is superb. I know that the plant itself is really good for all the natural pollinators. If you ever watch Japanese knotweed in bloom in the middle of September or August, just go look at it and count how many different species of pollinators are on there, native and non-native. Um, you'll be amazed if you actually took a book out there and try to identify them all. So I know it's an evil to a lot of us that, want to stop it and want to stomp it out, but as a whole, it's a really great plant. And there's a lot of healthy benefits for even for us to eat. It's one of the things that we eat in my household. I take the young fronds when it's only about 6 to 8 inches, and we'll cut them down and we'll actually eat them. My girls love it. Um, and then you have the big booming, double liliums and the big booming double peonies. And a lot of those, that, we've brought over from Europe and whatnot, they actually provide almost nothing to the bees. Those double petals are going to get right in front of, if you don't see the pistil and you don't see the pollen in the middle of that flower, if you can't see it, the bees aren't even going to bother with it. So that's something, when you want to see a flower that's up in bloom, those little pink or purple mint flowers that are wide open are way more attractive to a honeybee, mason bee, bumblebee than anything that that giant double peony is going to provide. Now, I grow giant peonies as well. They're beautiful. They smell great. They're excellent flowers, but they don't provide that much. Now, reversely, you look at a sunflower or a dahlia where it's wide open in the dead center, and the petals aren't actually folding on top of the pistil or anything. Those are producing a lot of nectar and a lot of pollen that the bees and everything else can get at very easily. So it's just a perspective. You can still have those gigantic flowers and still bring in the bees. Um, but something, like a big lily tree, as gorgeous as they might look, they're not actually going to bring a lot in. Um, so this is the aster that I was talking about earlier. I've been cultivating this in Branford for about 10 years. To this day, I have had 10 master gardeners come over and they can't identify the species. But I've been really, really good at keeping it in my area, and I've been giving out seeds to local beekeeping groups over the past few years. It will grow about 8 feet tall. It blooms for about 6 weeks. It starts usually in the beginning of September, and it'll go till about mid-October as long as there's not a frost. And it just gives you a huge cascading amount of flowers. And right around the beginning of October, that's when we see the monarch migration. Um, I would say 5 years ago, I used to get, I would go out in my backyard and I would see as many as 50 to 60 monarchs on there at any given time. And last year, I don't know what you guys saw, but I found it very disappointing. I think I would go out there, there'd be one or two. And this is a large quarter of an acre plot of just flowers that is dedicated to bring in, the monarchs and the bees. Right next to this, I have, close to a tenth of an acre of milkweed that, I try to cultivate the young. And this year again, we weren't, I go out with my daughters all the time, and I wasn't actually able to find any caterpillars this year for the first time. Um, so all we can kind of do is try. And but there's definitely something going on, and I have a few connections in the New Jersey environmental group. They usually call me for any kind of removal. They're actually looking to put the monarchs on the endangered species list, possibly next year or the year after. It takes a little while, but it's kind of scary when you think about how close they are to getting wiped out. Um, so we're going to talk about monoculture and food deserts, which we are, all guilty of to some degree. Anybody see those large fields of corn? Uh, Corn is a wind pollinator, so it does absolutely nothing for honeybees. There's a little bit of pollen on them, but there's absolutely no nectar on a corn plant. The same goes with grass, wheat, and hemp. Um, all four of those are wind pollinators. And although they can provide a little bit of protein and a little bit of amino acids for the bees, the bees are going to target other plants that don't that are not nectar free. They're going to go after the plants that have nectar. And I threw almonds on here because right now we're dealing with a mass migration of honeybees. Right around February 10th to February 20th, the almonds start flowering. And little over 2/3 of the honeybees in our entire country actually go over to California and they pollinate these huge crops of almonds. If we were to leave those colonies on these almond trees, they would eventually starve because that period of flowering is only about 2 to 3 weeks, and that only gives them about 2 to 3 weeks of food. Um, and there's no really good answer right now that any of the farmers or any of the beekeepers have to combat a lot of this. Almonds need a certain environment to grow. And, you know, the only way we can make this work is by bringing the bees to them. So with our common practice, with our common population across the world, monoculture, the only answer is honeybees, and they're really the only thing that are able to combat that. Right there, we have a picture of an almond that is actually grown in Branford, Connecticut. I grew that last year. It's the first almond I've ever grown, and who knows where that could turn into. But that was a very proud moment as a gardener, and a very proud moment for Branford because I don't know if anybody else in CT has grown one of those yet. At least I haven't heard of anything. But that's right in our backyard, and pollination from our girls. Um, this is what I like to see when I look at, a typical garden. We see the bee balm right in the front. We see a little bit of mustard right in the back. You have flowering lettuce in the back of there. And this is what, this chaos right here is well designed. You could pull out the mugwort, you could pull out all the weeds that are non-beneficial. But, dead center, we see this beautiful little girl right there. A nice bumblebee that's working the bee balm. Bee balm is definitely more focused for our native pollinators than it is honeybees. So when you don't see honeybees, don't panic. Start paying attention. You're going to see the little hoverflies and the little tiny mason bees. Those are all really what you're trying to provide food for because our grass lawns and everything else that we've been growing over the generations are providing nearly not they're providing almost nothing. Um, when we're planting these gardens for bees, bloom time is a very important criteria. So what I try to do is I try to space out the flowers that I grow in and around my yard. So I have a continuous bloom of flowers throughout the year. Having something in a pollinator garden is great, but if you have one plant that is there, you're probably one thing of lavender and one thing of this, and they all bloom at the same time. Well, you'll have bees for a week or two, and then they'll leave. And it's kind of we're all guilty of that monoculture practice. The best way to do it is have multiple different species of flowers blooming at the same exact time throughout the whole season. If you can gear yourself to growing plants that normally flower during a dearth. For instance, like a basswood, that's a late flowering tree. Um, you know, a lot of the other flowers like black-eyed Susan, that one if you deadhead it, that one could go well into August. Those are all flowers that, as long as we water well enough, they could provide a lot of energy for the bees because last year we had very strange weather. We had a frost almost in May 15th. When that frost happens, it shuts down all nectar flow. It shuts down all nectar flow, and now all the bees in that area no longer are able to pull food until it's over 34 degrees for at least 2 to 3 days. This isn't like sap in a maple tree where it just constantly flows. The flowers are very delicate, so once it freezes off, it cuts off all nectar flow for that flower. And so we started basically May 15th to have a really good chance of having honey season. And then we all remember June was dry as a bone when all of our late, mid-season flowers were coming into contact. we didn't have any moisture to, create any nectar with all the flowers. So one thing that we can do if we notice a prolonged dearth and we have a tree nearby, maybe a basswood, tulip poplar, whatever it might be, give it a little bit of water during a dearth, and that'll actually provide more good than anything you could throw in your garden. Um, One thing that we can do with to really make a serious impact on creating a better foodscape for animals and insects is changing our green grass lawns. Something like a creeping thyme, something like a sedum lawn, a clover lawn. All three of those options, you don't need to mow. It saves us time on mowing. It saves us time on a lot of the nonsense that a grass lawn needs, edging and whatnot. Sedum lawn is going to stop at your mulch pile. It's not going to grow into it. It's not going to grow underneath it. Creeping thyme might a little bit, but they're very easy to weed, and you can always take the thyme that is growing into your other gardens and just use it to season dishes. Um, but these are all things that we can do. Clover is another one. It feels great on the feet, but you never have to mow it. One thing you're going to have to watch out for with clover is don't go on it barefoot, because now you're going to have all these pollinators there, and everybody gets mad at the bee they step on, but they don't realize that they killed the bee that they stepped on during the process. I also often get asked, how many times you get stung a day. On a bad day, it's 60,000, or 60 times, 60 times in a bad day. Now, a lot of those times are my fault. I could be going through, 50 to 100 hives in a day. And a lot of times it's my mistake. I feel worse for the bee that stings me than I do, for myself. Um, and that's kind of the practice that you would have to get into if you had a clover lawn. You just have to think about the bees when you're there. Um, and a lot of the text on here, feel free to read it because I know I don't often follow it when I'm doing presentations. But this gives you a lot of information of between the sunflowers, the zinnia, the global thistle, cosmos. Those are flowers right there that just basically went from midsummer to beginning of fall with the cosmos, and they all will provide a lot of last minute resources right before they're going into their winter. Things to avoid. If you have a garden and you have, let's say a big diesel truck or there's diesel engines near you, the diesel fumes are actually really detrimental to a lot of insects, particularly honeybees, a lot of the wasps. It's really going to push away any of the honeybees into your yard. If you get a lot of those scents, it's going to push them away. Reversely, uh, the smell of bananas is actually something that is close to alarm scent. So when a bee stings you, they actually give you a beacon. So as that stinger's inside you, that is giving off pheromones that tells other bees this person is a threat. Come sting this person. So if you're eating bananas and you're around honeybees or you're around wasps, there's a good chance you can get actually unprovoked stung. Um, Dark colors. If you're around honeybees or you want to watch them naturally, whenever you're wearing really dark colors, you're going to represent one of their natural predators. Two of their natural predators are very dark colored. One is the skunk, and skunks will feast upon honeybees, and the other is the bear. We all know about Yogi and this big dark shape hovering over a hive. That's why a lot of the bee suits are very light colored or white. Um, you're not going to see too many of them that are dark. Plants to avoid if you want to try to attract bees. There's several types of European rhododendrons and European azaleas that actually are poisonous to honeybees. And there's several types of rhododendrons and azaleas where the honey from them is actually slightly toxic to humans. Um, Oleander has a very strong scented flower, but that's actually poisonous to honeybees as well. Um, One thing that a lot of people think that to do is leaving out water, the big bird baths that we always love. If there's not a way for the bees to get up over the side, for instance, like a bird bath, just by leaving standing water, that is going to invite a very large chance of bees drowning. If you leave a bucket out in the middle of an apiary, particularly if there's a little bit of sugar remnants in there, you're going to come back to hundreds and hundreds of dead bees. So it's something that we've learned often the hard way. But that's something that you try to avoid if you have a lot of pollinators coming into your area. We've already touched on wind pollinators. Another big one, which is always taboo with a lot of people, is pesticides. Um, I believe strongly that right now we're dealing with a max extinction of a lot of insects because of the pesticides and the herbicides that we often use. And it's usually we don't seem to notice it until it's almost gone. Kind of like the monarch, when are we going to start really being desperate about trying to save the monarchs when they're down to the thousands, or do we do it now? Even though some of these chemical labels are you know they're labeled that this is bee friendly. Well, they can have something that says bee friendly that still makes a bee sick, or still is detrimental to the bee. I always say a poison is a poison is a poison. So what I try to do is, try to go as organic as possible. If I have to get rid of a weed, I try to pull it by hand. If that's not a possibility, I'll use salt, vinegar, and soapy water. But we try to go about it different ways. If I need to get a log, I'll put mushroom spore in it, and that mushroom spore will actually eat out the stump or a log naturally instead of using chemicals. So there's a lot of ways we can get around using pesticides. It's just it's you can do everything right, and if your neighbor's spraying pesticides next to your yard and he or she sprays too much, it really doesn't matter how much effort you put into your yard. Those pesticides, that drift is going to come right into your yard. And I've dealt with it in Branford where I've had multiple colonies die in a night because next door they were spraying for mosquitoes and they went overkill on it and they didn't follow the application. So I can only imagine what the pollinators that aren't being attended by me or what's happening to them. So all the native pollinators, the natural insects that are out there, are still going to feel that impact. So, um, just try to, if you can, try to avoid it if you want a pollinator garden. I know that a lot of people have issues with like the lily leaf beetle. I go out there every night and I pick off that, I have 150 different species of lilium in my front yard. I'm my favorite flower by far, but I will go out there every night and I will check under the leaves. I will look for the eggs. I will destroy them, mechanically. Um, Now I just wanted to finish up to show, a few of, this is obviously some milkweed right here. This was a couple years ago. I didn't have one of these little critters last year, which was sad. But we do a lot of this on our farm as well. We try to, here's a chrysalis, and here's the next generation right up here learning how to, you know, save another species as much as we can. But we'll often capture the monarchs when they're in their caterpillar stage, and we will provide a home for their chrysalis and let them out in the wild. Something that most people don't realize is, some people say, well, why do you do that? From egg to butterfly, only about 5% of the eggs actually survive just from the natural predation of monarchs. So by doing something as simple as this, taking 5 of them, 10 of them in, at the caterpillar stage, you're actually doing a really big difference, in your little area. I say if, a little bit of wind goes one way, it could do a lot of help. Um, but that's the presentation, and I think we can open it up to comments. I just need to open up the chat room. Here we are. All right. Oh, I guess we got to be off by 2. So if people have questions, feel free to type them in now.
And I was wondering if we could go over to 2 o'clock. Do we just have the time for a certain amount of hours? We don't. We're not limited. You're muted, Ann.
So Nancy, bees from the colony, they can travel anywhere from 2 to 5 miles from a colony. That's honeybees. Something like a yellow jacket generally stays around 100 meters from their colony, and bumblebees will generally go about 1 to 2 miles from their colony. Um, any particular type of sedum for lawns? You want like a creeping sedum. There's a lot of low-lying creeping sedum. If you can get like a mixture of several different varieties, I know a lot of the nurseries are selling it. I know that Shelley's had it last year, and it's just a ground covering sedum. Now it's going to take several years to cultivate this, um, but to me it's worth it. I've been trying to incorporate Leotris and creeping thyme into my lawn personally, and a lot of clover. Um, so a clover lawn. So you know what I do on the sides of my lawn. So we also are a mushroom farm. So I try to use a lot of mulch anywhere around where I have any type of grass or whatnot. I'm really getting rid of grass. Eventually, I will have zero grass. Um, and in between that mulch and where the grass is, I put logs. You know, anything from 6 to 8 inch logs, and I will put mushroom spawn into those logs. Now, what that's going to provide for your clover lawn is as those logs decompose, the mushrooms burn them out, you're going to have a lot of natural humus that's going to be working its way into the soil. And that's going to actually give a lot of your lawn energy. Another thing that I use a ton of leaf mulch. Seaweed, I'm a big fan of using seaweed. I grow potatoes
Uh,
and seaweed. Chopping up seaweed, putting it on your yard, and then mowing it over is a great way to basically add a lot of mulch into your area. And as far as ways to add clover in places, um, you just have to really cultivate the land. You have to mill it over, till the grass in, and then plant your clover seed, and it should overtake any of the grass that's in there. Um, as far as stopping by the farm, yes, you guys, I definitely have people over. I know it's very tough this with the COVID. I generally have, multiple young beaks that are with me, beekeepers. We call each other beaks. Um, Work through my hives, and I work together. I actually have an intern that works with me full time. But I definitely will, have people over, particularly when this whole thing is over. If people are looking to buy candles or honey or whatnot, everybody can buy directly from us. But we're always on sale at Shelley's Garden, and we're always on sale at Better Ways in the center of town. Honey is very small portion of what we do. Most of what I do is management and mentoring. So I manage other people's farms as like a head beekeeper, and I do a lot of mentoring for one-on-one with other beekeepers. Where can I get mushroom spawn for? Um, so I often cultivate my own mushroom spawn. I get the mycelium from, a lot of our back woods. But if you wanted to get like a shiitake, um, Mushroom Mountain is a good supplier. So Mushroom Mountain will actually provide you with plugs or the actual mycelium to grow your own mushrooms. And basically, all you need is a log that's been down for, within 6 weeks, that's still fresh, and you inoculate it with those plugs. It's very easy to do. And you can get your fresh mushrooms right in your backyard. One of the most overlooked elements of a garden, I think, is mushrooms and cultivating, tasty mushrooms, right in your backyard. And they're so good for you. It's an alternative form of protein. Anything else?
Was so wonderful.
Oh, it was
Thank you.
super, Ryan. Thank you so much. It was just great.
So
Good,
Necker's
good.
Farm is in Stony Creek, and we could
No,
go to your store.
We're
it's
in
in
Indian Neck, so
Indian Neck.
we're
Indian
right
Neck. I'm
next to
sorry.
Buds. So we're right next to Buds.
Well,
So
no,
Lenny's, I could throw a football to Lenny's.
I know exactly where you're talking about. We go to Bud's. Yep, and Lenny's.
So
Right.
yeah, all the,
Brian, we're going to have this uploaded to our website so people can see it as they would like to. So I can't thank you enough for doing this. We really appreciate it. It was great.
absolutely,
Great.
absolutely. I mean, we're close to spring, guys, so it's we're almost gonna see flowers soon. Waiting for the snowdrops
Yes.
to pop out any day now.
Yeah,